For now, I want to introduce the talk of the sower. So this idea that we have all, I guess, maybe, have seen or have heard about the parable of the sower is one of the beautiful, one of the many beautiful parables that Jesus had taught us. And there's a lot, as usual as well, there's a lot of wisdom in this parable. And the approach of the talk today, of the lecture today, is just for us to think about and expand our understanding of this parable that is so important and so up to date. Some the things that Jesus had taught us are always going to be up to date. They're never outdated. So I brought it here first and foremost. The exact text, for those who have seen my talks before, I always like to bring the actual text so we can read verbatim as it was said, and then we can reflect and study and learn together. This specific passage is from Matthew chapter 13. This is also in Luke chapter 8 and Mark chapter 4. So we can see how important this is. It makes an appearance in different gospels. And this one specifically, this is after a moment where Jesus went out of the house by the sea. He was, sitting down and all of that. A multitude, so a lot of people came and stood at the shore, waiting to hear from him. And then he said, and I'm going to read this passage straight from the Bible here. Then he spoke many things to them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went out to sow. As he sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, and the birds came and devoured them. Some fell on stony places, where they did not have much earth, and they immediately sprang up because they had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up and choked them. But others fell on good ground and yielded a crop, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. As usual, like I was saying, Jesus taught in parables, or he talked in parables, which, interestingly, for anybody who's not familiar, the word parable is from the Latin parabola, means parable, which means leave to the side, so drop it on the side, which is so interesting because, as with all the parables, there is not something that's very direct that is saying you need to do this or you need to do that, you didn't do this. It's not pointing the finger. It's something that it's a story that is told. It's almost like dropping something to the side, and whoever sees it fit will see it fit, So that's an interesting piece of the parables too, and Jesus taught in many, many parables. This one specifically, he was using, so the people could understand, he was using things of the time. Obviously, he spoke of things, he could see way in the future, being the spirit that he was, but he was using things and elements of the time. And back then, there was a lot of planting, a lot of, things revolving around agriculture. Therefore, he was using these elements so people could start to understand what they were. And further on in the gospel, and in the different gospels as well, both in Luke and Mark and also Matthew, we understand that what he's talking about, and he says that the meaning of the parable is that the seed is the word of God. So Jesus here is talking about a sower going out to sow. He's talking about the seeds falling on different terrains, and each of those seeds had a different destiny, a different result came from those seeds being sown. And that is so rich. There's so much depth in this little passage here, in this parable, that the proposition of today's talk is for us to look at that, see where does it connect with Spiritism, and apply to our lives and to our own selves. So there's an explanation. This is the beautiful part as well. So as we see, and here for each slide, I wanted to put a specific seed or a specific result that came from a specific, terrain. This one, he says, as he sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, and the birds came and devoured them. To make it more obvious, further down the line, within the same chapter of that same Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13, they explain, which means when anyone hears the message, meaning the word of God about the kingdom, and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. This explanation is perhaps sufficient, but if we dive a little bit deeper, and like I said, if we try to connect with things that we see in Spiritism, what we'll see is that the seed that was planted and fell by the wayside, and the birds came and devoured them, there was all these things that are almost like as if the sower was planting in a way haphazardly, or the seeds were, there wasn't much of a care with the soil, with the terrain, or where the seeds were gonna be, sown. So they were sowed there, and what happens was, it says that the birds came and devoured them, etc. This is the terrain. So these are the seeds, the words of God, the words of the gospel, the words of, the third revelation, the consoler, that are falling to the wayside. And when it says the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. So if we translate the terrains, or if we imagine the terrains as being the different states of the human heart, we can see that if there is a very, very hard terrain, a very rigid heart, when the words come, the words are not going to be able to penetrate at least as easily, and they might just be blown to the wind or being taken by birds. And it's saying even here, the evil one comes away, or there is some translations that I found that says the devil comes and take it away. If we think of Spiritism, as we know, with the connection with the spiritual world and how we're all under the influence, question 459 of the Spirit's book, we're greatly under the influence of the spiritual realm, we can imagine how these could also apply to sometimes when we had these hearts, or if we have these hardened hearts, when the word comes to us, there might be an obsessor that's going to come and say, don't believe in that. No, this is not true. They're trying to trick you. They're trying to fool you. And the word is going to be just dissolved and it's going to fall to the wayside. So therefore, if we see, if we think about the purpose of sowing seeds is for the plants, for the seed to germinate and the plants to grow. In this specific example of this first passage, or this first, line here in the gospel, we're going to see that nothing happened from that. But let's look at the other one. It said, some fell on stony places where they did not have much earth, and they immediately sprang up because they had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And the explanation? The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. So they receive the word with joy at first. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the world, they quickly fall away. What a deep and beautiful way to look at this specific passage, because it's saying that the terrain is rocky. How interesting is that? Jesus, always so wise with his word choice. The terrain is rocky, meaning there are some rocks there, under the earth, outside of the earth, on top of it, etc. But the seeds, they do take some root, they start to spring up, says, but there's no depth of earth. There's no depth of earth. So what happens is the sun comes up, they are not strong enough, and they just die. They wither away. And the sun, in a way, or the rocks being, again, this barrier that is often present when we are trying to internalize the word of God. The barrier that our hearts, and again, let's think of the terrains as being the human heart, that our hearts often take this state or this shape of, we're not ready to hear it yet. We're not ready to internalize it yet. Or at first we may be very excited, just like with it's saying there. But then as soon as something comes up, as soon as there's an impediment, a barrier, something, it just doesn't hold through. Which is what they're saying there. When trouble or persecution comes because of the world, because it has come and it will continue to come, rest assured of that, they quickly fall away. But let's look at the third at the third set of seeds, let's call it. Some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up and choked them. So they fell among thorns, which is also a barrier of sorts, right? So it's saying the seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. Very similarly to the other, the one we just talked about with the rocky terrain. But this one, in the sense, there are these thorny, the thorns. It's the thorny soil, which is interesting, because if we think about, the earth with stones, and we think about earth with thorns, thorns are living things in a way that they grow and they can choke out the faith. It's different than the stone that's already there, kind of. But the thorns, no, as soon as the seeds start to sprout, they start to grow, the thorns come and choke them. And it's saying here, the deceitfulness of wealth. How beautiful is that? And once again, let's imagine all these things that can come in the way of the word of God, aka the seeds, germinating in our hearts, and then springing up, growing, generating fruits of love and joy. These are some of the barriers that they have found, but it's interesting because there's different types of soil. And then we finally reach, some a happy ending, perhaps, because Jesus also said, but others fell on good ground and yielded a crop. Wow, only that would have been enough, perhaps. But no, but he even qualifies the crop. Some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. So there's a difference even in the how much it was yielded from the seeds. And then the explanation from the gospel, but the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown. It's not by accident that there was this, like I said, Jesus qualified or even measured or quantified in a way for everybody to understand. Because when those seeds, they reach a heart, when the word of God reaches a heart that is ready, and those seeds really take place, and they germinate, they grow, they develop, they become a plant, who can tell how many fruits that plant will have? If we look at a bunch of seeds in our hands before we plant them, can we really look at one seed and say, this one's going to be 100 fruits, this one's going to be 60? We can't. But the thing is, when we're planting the seeds as the sowers, or when we're receiving the seeds as, the terrains, the word of God, we have to be very careful, and we have to be mindful to let those seeds germinate, to let them grow, to try to understand the words, to try to understand the message, so we can yield a crop that is maybe 100-fold, some 60, some 30. When I was talking to Kiki about the different lectures that we could bring for today's meeting, she mentioned that there was one a recent one about Chico Xavier, and how much his work was so beautiful. This is the example of somebody who's who the seeds yielded 100-fold. Somebody who's one seed generated so many beautiful fruits of love and understanding and truly living the gospel. But the reality of it is, when we bring this parable to our lives, we have to understand as well what's the state of our hearts? How are we in this parable? How are the seeds sort of falling in our hearts? And each person has a unique trajectory, which is the beautiful thing about humanity, in my opinion. We all are very unique. Perhaps somebody hearing this now, somebody looking at this is thinking, well, that the other terrain, that was me 20 years ago, that was me 10 years ago, that was me last year. We all have had different trajectories. Or if we think again with Spiritism and the idea that our souls are immortal, and we have had different, flesh vestments. We have inhabited different bodies. Maybe in the past, most likely, I'm gonna dare say, in the past, we had our hearts were like these other terrains, the one with the stones, the one with the thorns, But what we must do is continue to work so that our terrains can be like this one, where when the seeds fall, when the message of love and hope reaches our heart, it truly takes root. And no matter what happens, no matter the sun, no matter whatever comes in its way, we must have these deep roots, so our plants can go and generate many, many fruits. So our minds, our feelings open to the teachings of Christ and the teachings of the Consoler, the third revelation. This is going to help us have, like I said, yield crops, hopefully 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. And then I brought a parable here, or a story, a small story. This one, it was in a book psychographed by Chico Xavier by Humberto de Campos. And he talked about the incomplete sower. So Humberto is going to tell us, who is the spiritual author. He's going to tell us that there was this man who heard the words of God, and he was very, very adept and very eloquent, and he would speak with a passion. He would, as a Christian, he was spreading the word of the Lord. He never stopped doing that. He was an excellent conversationalist, always teaching, always bringing excellent logic and spreading, he says, verbal treasures. That's what he said. And then painting these beautiful pictures in people's minds with his words. But what happened was, deep down, even though his words were beautiful, deep down he emphasized the benefit of cooperation, but deep down what he wanted was to be helped. He wanted people to help him. He used to smile happily when he received the title of guide, but he didn't smile when he received the title of brother. And with the passage of time, this man started to become very disenchanted with people around him because he wasn't getting the recognition that he wanted. He was also noticing that a lot of the words that he was spreading, they weren't necessarily, those seeds, let's translate it to the parable, they weren't necessarily taking roots. So he started to become very discouraged, very disenchanted, also letting his own pride and selfishness speak without him even realizing that they were speaking. So he was becoming more and more, he started to become more and more, like I said, disenchanted with the society, and then less people started to attend his lectures and all of that. And eventually he gave up and he decided to live a very secluded lifestyle. He said, I don't want anything to do with anybody anymore. People don't understand me. They don't care, etc., etc., etc. So he left and he became somebody that was like a hermit. He became somebody that lived on his own, that kept all that, all of that skill, all of that eloquence, all of that to himself, because he felt misunderstood by people and he wasn't getting the things he was expecting that he was going to get. One day, this man discarnates. So he passes away to the spiritual plane, and he realized that he found himself with a very, very dim light. He spread the light so beautifully through his words, but there he was, very, very dimmed. And then one day he was praying fervently for somebody to help him, for Jesus to help him, and Jesus comes to him. And then he starts to talk with him, and then Jesus says, what mission did you fulfill among men? And he said, I spent decades master, just like the sower of the parable, spreading all these seeds, but all I reaped was ingratitude, was incomprehension. And then Jesus asks him, if you threw so many seeds haphazardly, what did you do with the soil? Meaning, before spreading those seeds, what did you do with the soil? Man was taken aback, and he was saying, but I don't think in the parable it never talks about like the soil. And then Jesus tells him, what about the farmer then, who plants haphazardly, who does not remove the stones from the field, nor help the unfortunate swamp? It's easy, he says, it's easy to scatter the seeds. Preparing the soil, however, requires direct cooperation from the servant, willing to contribute with his own sweat. He says, do you expect that the you're gonna just look at the swamp and the swamp's gonna drain itself? That you're gonna look at that rock and say move, and the rock is gonna move for you to start planting? So he says to this man, what have you done for the hearts that you have converted into soil for your sowing? What example did you give? What have you done? How have you prepared those hearts? How have you prepared the soil? The man was completely taken aback. He started to cry and lament all those years that he lost, not paying attention to the soil, not giving his own blood, sweat, and tears to prepare those soils for the seeds that he envisioned planting. And then Jesus tells him, each heart breathes in a different climate. And that was something that was very beautiful. Each heart sort of lives in different state. Each heart is a soil in a different state, and is it not? If we think about it, if we look in our own families, if we look in our own circle of friends, if we look in our own circle of co-workers, our own brothers and sisters of a Spiritist Center even, each heart is a soil in its own very unique and singular state. And then Jesus continues to tell him that the soil demands a lot of work, and that this blessed ministry requires or demands renunciation and sacrifice. And he says, by serving others, you're going to help yourself. But for now, and that's what he says, for now, he tells the man, you are an incomplete sower. Meaning incomplete, you are not yet the sower, because you have scattered the seeds, but you have not taken care of the soil. You have not consulted the needs of the soil. And then Jesus says, now you're going to have another opportunity to go again, and this time pay attention to the soil. Of course, I'm making it very in my very own simple words. Humberto de Campos writes way better than this, but the idea is this: like, you're going to have another opportunity. Make good use of it, but realize that it's not just about spreading the seeds. It's not just about being a very eloquent, great lecturer and somebody who has charisma and all of that, has a presence. No, you have to be careful, and you have to prepare the soil that you're sowing your seeds. Otherwise, you are an incomplete sower. Basically, again, in my words, this is what he was telling him. So the beauty of the parable, apart from everything that happened with the seeds and the soil, we can even zoom in further, and by looking at perhaps one of the first sentences of the parable, because in some of them he says behold, or others say he says look, but there is this specific thing that he says, and like I said, it varies depending on the translation, but there are three elements here that I wanted to sort of study together with you today. He says a sower went forth to sow. So there's three elements here. So went out or went forth, again, depending on the translation of the gospel there. And I made them color in three different colors to make it very, very, very obvious as well. Because we have the sower, So we have the person that is tasked with spreading the seeds, planting the seeds, not just spreading them haphazardly, went forth or went out. That conveys an action. That's a verb. That conveys an action. And then to sow. So therefore, a sower, somebody with a specific task, is going out, and the going out is interesting as well, to sow, to do a specific task, regardless of what they are. A sower went out to sow. So these three elements, and the first one I want to look at is the sower, the actual person. On chapter 17, item 7 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, and for those who have not watched my lectures yet, I like to leave the reference on the top right corner. I always recommend people to go and look and see for yourselves. He says that we learned that duty is a moral obligation, firstly to ourselves and then to others. Duty is a law of life encountered in the smallest details as well as in the most elevated acts. So a sower, somebody who is a sower, has this duty to do something specific with what he or she has at their disposal. So a sower in this situation is somebody who has a moral obligation, because again, bringing the parable to real life, the sower refers to the seeds, refer to the words of God. So spreading the words of God. Therefore, who is the sower then? And this is an interesting thing, because whoever is the sower has a moral obligation. And this is something that perhaps is going to blow people's minds, but my proposition is that we are all sowers. It's not just the one who's talking about spiritism or the gospel. It's not just somebody who's giving lectures or has a podcast or is doing courses, or no, because our lives are examples to others. What we do with our lives are examples to others, and we are inhabiting a body temporarily to fulfill a certain purpose, but the only purpose we all have in common is to grow as spirits and to grow together as a humanity. There's the solidarity aspect. So in a way, the sower that's sowing the words of God, that's spreading the seeds were the words of God, we do that through our acts. We do that through our actions. And it says there, the smallest details, as well as in the most elevated acts. So the person who goes and gives food to the poor is a sower. The person who goes and helps somebody in need financially, or gives somebody a hug when they need it, is a sower. Because God in Jesus, teaching the words of God, teaching about the kingdom of God, he's talking about love. First and foremost is the beginning. It begins with love and ends with love, meaning everything in between drives us to love. So whenever we're doing a loving act, we are sowing. Because imagine what that person might do. If we forgive somebody with love, if we express gratitude for somebody else with love, can we imagine in their heart how that love, that action is going to take root, those seeds? And the seed's not just the word, because the word could be very literal and mean just one thing. But if we think of the action, that's my proposition here. Let's think of us all as sowers, and talking about somebody who was a great sower through his actions, not only his words and his letters, his actions. Paul, the great apostle of the Gentiles, a great sower of the gospel through words and actions. And he says, when you sow, you do not plant the body that will be, but just a seed, perhaps of wheat or of something else. So of course, he's bringing once again these elements that people could understand back then. And he's saying, when you sow, you do not plant the body. When you are truly expressing an act of solidarity, an act of love, you're not already planting that same charitable inclination in the other person, but rest assured you're planting a seed. Rest assured you're planting a seed. And if there's something that I think it always stays in my mind is this saying from the story, the starfish story. I'm not going to tell it in full, but it's this idea that you may end up forgetting all the people that you help along your life, along the way, but they will never forget you. And if we think ourselves right now of people that have helped us in some way, shape, or form, any way, shape, or form in our lives, it's guaranteed that because of that help, seeds were sown in our hearts. So he's saying, when you sow, you do not plant the body that will be, but just a seed. So the sower, therefore, and this is perhaps a plot twist, if I may be facetious here, a plot twist in the parable is that the sower is all of us. The sower is not just the person that comes and speaks and tries to give lectures and things like that. No, no, no. The sower is all of us. We're all sowers. And then we have the second element here. A sower went out or went forth to sow. So the second element of this specific sentence, the going out, so this leaving conveys, look how interesting this is. It conveys going from one place to the other. Work is not done while standing still in idleness. The leaving here is optional. The sower could have gathered his seeds and just rested in his house and not done anything with those seeds. Which is what happened with the incomplete sower in the story that I talked a couple of slides ago, where he went in solitude and just became there, secluded and like a hermit. So he was hard, keeping all the seeds to himself in a way. But the going forth, so the going out, the leaving, conveys an action. It is an action, but conveys this message of you have to move and go somewhere. You don't sow from sitting down your couch from the window and expect it to have good results. You go out there and you sow. So the same thing is applied to us in our lives, because, and I put this one here, going out means working. It means proactivity, not passivity. It means using our free will. And this is a key concept that often goes unnoticed when we're thinking about this parable or this specific passage here. The free will. So we have the free will to go out to sow the word of God, to go out and to spread acts of understanding, of humility, of solidarity, of charity, of love. We have that option. We have that option. We always have that option. Because as one of my favorite authors, Leon Denis, says, the soul is the sovereign of its actions, to each according to his or her own actions. We've heard this before. So there's this idea that even though we are all sowers, when we are sowing, we have to go out, we have to leave, go from one place to the other. We have to move, and doesn't necessarily mean, physically, but we have to move to be able to sow, to be able to exercise that duty, no matter how small we think it may be, of us as being sowers of the words of God. So looking at the went forth or going out, this action, we have in the book by Leon Denis, The Problem of Life and Destiny, when he says, especially about free will, this is chapter 23 entitled Free Will. He says, freedom or liberty is a necessary condition of the human soul, which without it could not construct its destiny. Its liberty is a necessity. We have a lot of lectures on the free will. I'm glad we do, because it is a concept that is very important for us to understand, that free will is this sort of instrument, this tool, this benefit that we have received through years and years of evolution, where we are the writers of our own stories. And we have that pen every day in our hands. Every day we're writing a different page in a story than a book that is very, very long. But without free will, without this condition of free will, the soul would not be able to construct its own destiny. So he says, therefore, he invites us, let us rise to the conscience of our true role and goal, and we will be free. Let us understand, therefore, that we are all sowers. But we have this incumbents of the sower, of being sowers. Also, instead of forming passive beings bent under the yoke of matter and prey to uncertainty and inertia, let us fashion truly free souls, freed from the chains of fate and hovering over the world by their superior, well-earned qualities. Chains of fate. I bolded that because it's very interesting, the words that he uses here. These chains of fate, because we're not going to be just passive observers of everything that's happening around us. We're not going to fall prey to an outdated determinism that, oh, it is what it is, I can't do anything about it. My destiny is already set forth. I can't do anything. It's not that. That passivity is the same thing as the sower being home and having the seeds, having the capacity to spread them, which we all do and we do every day, but deciding not to. So this is a very interesting piece here, the free will and this notion that we can't be idle. And then we have the third element, a sower went forth to sow. So what does it mean to sow and sow what? And we already talked a little bit about this, that we are always sowing, because what we sow is we sow the words of God through our actions, through our own examples, even to the discarnate spirits. As Joanna D'Angelis, another spirit author that we received the messages through the blessed hands of our dear Divaldo, she always said that there's a multitude of discarnate beings watching your every step. Wow. So even when I'm alone and I think I'm keeping the seeds to myself, nobody's looking. Yes, there is somebody looking. So what matters here is not that we must be, oh my God, then I'm going to be afraid. No, the idea is that we are all sowers. We need to go out. Involves free will, going out to sow, but we're sowing the words of God through our examples. Emmanuel, one also my favorite spirit authors, he talks about how we will plant every day, he says. It is the law. We will plant every day. He says that. And I love that he's very categorical in a way. He doesn't leave room for much doubt there. He says, we will plant every day. It is the law. Even the inactive, he says, even the inactive and idle are cultivating the weeds of improvidence. So even those who think that they're not doing anything, they are doing something. It's just not the something that we want to be sowing. So our words, our actions, those are all important things when we're thinking about the sowing piece. And in another talk that I gave here about speech and silence, we talked about, the woman who's spreading the feathers on top of the mountain. The feathers went everywhere. That's sowing through the actions, through the words. So we are sowing. What we must decide is, what are we going to sow? What do we want to sow? What sort of example do we want to set? So then, this in the book, The Way, the Truth, and the Life by Chief Xavier, psychographed by Emmanuel. In this message, there's this message here where Emmanuel says that it is God's law that every seed sown must grow. Incorrect sowing has conditioned them to the so-called dying in sin. They spend their days redeeming heavy debts, but fail once more by sowing incorrectly once again. So if we think about how many times maybe have we sowed incorrectly, how many reincarnations perhaps have we had to go through to understand this concept, to understand that perhaps what we were sowing is not what's going to lead us forward, to advance us the way we want to advance. Many, even he warns us in the same message how many spirits, they go from one physical body to the other, but they continue on earth recapitulating their lives over and over again. So he says, let us be careful each day For once evil or good has been sown, it will grow right along with us according to the laws that govern life. So there's no determinism here as well, because he's saying that it's gonna grow right along with us according to the laws that govern life. So things will grow depending on how we're cultivating them as well, evil or good. And that's something that's very important. If we think of the lesser things, the evil things that we cultivate in our hearts, they're only going to stay there if we let them take root, if we water them through our actions and our vices and all those things. Pride, selfishness, rebellion, ire, all those things are going to continue to grow if we don't take care of them. Those seeds are going to sprout if we don't take care of them. But the good part is that the good ones will as well when we're cultivating the higher values. In the book Our Daily Bread, and I like to bring a lot of different resources always, because to show again the congruency of the message. This one is Our Daily Bread, another book of messages, and in this one there's this message number 7 called the seed. So now let's look at the specific thing. We talked about the sower going forth to sow and sowing, the act of sowing itself. Now let's talk about the seed, the words of God, the seed. How can we think of that? In the workings of nature, we see the seed as taking on the sacred role of priestess of the Creator in life. The glorious heiress of divine power, it participates in the evolution of the world and silently transmits to the individual its sublime lesson, marked with infinite significance. So Emmanuel is saying that the seed is the priestess of the Creator in life. It says the glorious hairs of divine power, it's teaching us a sublime lesson. And some of the lessons he already says here. It wisely exemplifies the need for starting points, conscientious work demands, proper places and appropriate times. Let's remember what happened with the different soils and the seeds on those different soils in the parable. Knowing how to begin is a very important skill, he's going to say. So when we are in the position of sowers, we have to be mindful of beginning, of our first step. And then he says, in our redemptive effort, we must not lose sight of the smallest possibilities. A gesture, a conversation, an hour of our time, or a word can represent glorious seeds for immortal accomplishments. It is crucial, therefore, never to disregard them. I love this passage. Never to disregard the greatness of the small things. Because in reality, a gesture, a conversation, 1 hour of our time, one word can represent glorious seeds for immortal accomplishments. One thing that we do towards a brother or a sister in need can become a seed that will grow, and who knows how many fruits that's going to be, 100-fold, how much crop that's going to yield, 60-fold, 30-fold. But the idea is for that these seeds grow for immortal accomplishments. How many people have we not seen throughout thousands of years in which the words of Christ have germinated and they generated so much for us? And by us, I mean the humanity who's still here erring, who's still here learning through our own ignorance, our own selfishness, and trying to domesticate our own inner beasts. Let's think of Jesus and Simon the Cyrene when he was, basically almost pressured to help Jesus carry the cross. With one look from Jesus, one stare, that man already felt a change in his heart, a change in his attitude and everything else. With one look. So Emmanuel is saying here wisely for us not to disregard the smallest things, because in reality, we'll never know what that small thing, I'm going to put in quotation marks here, small things, how that small thing will grow. We cannot look at one seed and say how much fruit that seed will produce. But we must plant that seed. And if we take it from a micro to a macro standpoint, in terms of our spiritual evolution, we are but spiritual seeds. we're still growing, we're still developing. We have so much more to learn before we reach a state of angelitude, before we reach our quote unquote final state of evolution. We have so much more to give still. And in the gospel, according to Spiritism, we have here that if God, the absolute Lord of eternity, waits with patience, why cannot we, imperfect servants, also wait? The seed, when sown out of season, will not germinate. And we also learn that in the gospel, according to Spiritism, that be patient, because this is also a charity. So being patient is also a charity, and it's such a hard one. Let's be honest. I don't know for you, at least for me, being patient is very, very hard. It is something where we're constantly learning and trying to and receiving these lessons sometimes that we don't think we asked for, but we receive those lessons where we have to exercise our patience. And it's also talking here about how when the seed is grown or is sown out of season, it's not going to germinate. So we have to be mindful again of the season, of the soil, of all those things we already talked about. Jesus, puts patience in this, category of virtues. Joanna de Angelis, again, the author Joanna de Angelis, again, she says that patience is an instrument, is a life instrument. She said, patience is a life instrument for the service of perfection. It's an instrument. It's something that the seed has. The seed teaches us, and we must apply as well. And in the book Thought and Life, I told you I'd bring many sources. Emmanuel says, God does not demand that the seed immediately produce the species to which it corresponds. He gives it time to germinate, grow, flower, and bear fruit. So too with us. We have been given time to germinate, and we always will, because God is love. God is tolerance. Infinitely perfect and good and just. But we must internalize this ourselves, as now again we're talking more about the seed now itself, that there is a time for that. There is also specific conditions. We talked about with the seed sown out of seasons not going to germinate. Same thing with the soil. The seed needs specific conditions to fulfill its purpose. But in doing this, talk and thinking about this, I realize that sometimes we can surprise ourselves with the ability to grow and face with adversity. And I have put that little picture there on the bottom right corner of a seed or little plant sprouting in between concrete, in between asphalt probably. We sometimes are, we're taken aback by the ability to grow under adversity. So yes, even though it needs a specific condition, sometimes we can't even fathom that specific condition. That's beautiful, because if we think about extremely smart children in these areas that are very impoverished and war torn and all of that, they don't have time, or they don't have the resources to access books and things like that, but they still end up being all that they are, because they are immortal spirits as well. And then we see them sprouting and giving so many fruits from these conditions of adversity, or loving children's coming from very traumatic upbringings. We have all of those things, so we must never look away from an opportunity to sow and an opportunity to pay attention to the soil and the seed, because we sometimes don't even know that seed is going to grow there. And then the minister Clarencio, in the book Between Heaven and Earth, which is the one that I have on the top right there, this book is by André Luis, psychographed by Chico. He says that like the plant, the soul can sprout in any tract of soil, but it wouldn't be good to sow choice seeds on uncultivated land. So being very mindful once again of the terrain, of working the terrain that we have at our disposal. But what about we? And I say we, those who are gathered here, those who are listening, are going to be watching this later on. Spiritists, if we say, okay, I am a spiritist, I like spiritism, I'm a sower, I got all of that. What does Emmanuel say? He says the spiritist is called to the role of a robust beam capable of showing that not everything is lost, a beam of light, if we think about it. Work by serving, aware that each one of us is an agent of self-propaganda. We are all sowers. He says, in the work of human redemption, which is not born of violence, but of truth and love in the fraternal touch of spirit to spirit. In view of this, if you can do much for the benefits of others through what you know, you will only be able to renew your fellow men through what you are. And this is the final message that I wanted to leave here. For us to say, oh, I'm a spiritist or I'm not a spiritist, but I like what's being said. This idea that no matter how much we know, no matter how much we do, we're only going to grow by serving one another, by helping one another, conscious that we are the agents, like he says, of our self-propaganda. We're going to transform ourselves, continue to transform ourselves and those around us in a world that's is in so much need of that. Not by what we know, how many books we've read and all the knowledge we've acquired from listening to this or that, no, but by what we are, by realizing that we are all sowers and that we're sowing constantly, and we have this free will to go out and actually do it, so we can be the change we wish to see in the world, which is one of my favorite quotes ever. And with that, I wish everybody here a blessed week with plenty of sowing.
Well, thank you, Yuri. That's really an awesome gift, awesome seeds that you've been planting. We appreciate that. I believe that now, with the help of Kiki, we're going to open up the forum for everybody that have any questions.